Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining and spending some time with us this evening. This training is designed to help support folks who want to advocate for cleaner air and a healthier environment. And so we just want to go ahead and welcome everybody. Next slide, please. All right, so welcome. Instead of waiting to see what happens in November and then strategizing to discuss air quality issues with legislators, we just wanted to proactively hold this training. And so before jumping into the presentation, there's just a few housekeeping items. So first, this meeting is recorded. So if anybody has to jump off, please feel free to do so. You will get a link to this recording. And if you want to share this recording link with other folks that didn't get a chance to attend, you'll have the opportunity to do so. Second is the slide deck will be shared. So there's no need to really copy a whole bunch of notes. This is an evening meeting, so I totally understand. So just sit back and relax and try to enjoy all this knowledge we're about to share with everyone. Third is that this training is only an hour, and so we will not be able to cover all things air quality and advocacy related. And so what we decided to do along with this training is actually create an advocacy manual. And this manual will be shared in the thank you email. And so a lot of the topics that we'll discuss today there will be a deeper dive and like how-tos and just different guideposts to help illustrate these conversations. And finally, for Q&A, we would really appreciate it if folks just throw their questions into the chat. We have Harmony Mason, our policy associate, all the way from London. So she's doing this at 11 p.m. So we really appreciate her. She will be tracking the chat. So if you guys can just go ahead and throw in those questions, we'll do our very best to answer every question that comes through. Next slide, please. Okay. So for the presenters, I have the lovely pleasure of co-hosting with, well, actually, I should pause and go back. My name is Brittany Griffin. I'm the advocacy manager at CleanAIRE NC, and I have the pleasure of hosting this lovely training with Kennedy Williams, who is our community engagement coordinator. And Ryan Carter is our lovely special guest. He is the policy manager at Catawba Riverkeeper. And so just some quick background information about us. I joined CleanAIRE about a year and some months ago. And so after graduating law school, I wanted to work in the nonprofit sector around environmental issues. Kennedy recently joined our team a few months ago. She recently graduated from Howard University and served as a White House intern for the Environmental Quality Division. And Ryan Carter graduated from Woodford College, and at Catawba Riverkeeper, Ryan works with members of the public, civic leaders, and elected officials to protect and enhance our waters. Ryan is also a registered lobbyist, so that's great because Ryan has lots of knowledge of what it is like to work in the General Assembly. Next slide, please. Thank you. So for today's session, we have 3 objectives. The first is to understand air pollution and its impact. The second is to become familiar with some of the legislation that protects the air that we breathe. And third is to learn some potential strategies that we can use to enhance air quality in the communities in which we live in. Next slide, please. Thank you. But before jumping into the actual presentation, we wanted to create some type of interaction, and that's always kind of hard doing it on a virtual platform. And we do understand that folks dread breakout rooms. And so what we decided to do was have some poll questions. There are only 3 poll questions in this training session. And so this is the first one. And we know that we are 54 days away from election. So I will launch the first poll question just to get a sense of like, what's everybody's mood? And it was really hard to just even narrow down these questions or responses just to 4 songs. So I will go ahead and launch that. And so if you have the ability to answer, please do. These answers are anonymous, so we won't get to see like who answered what. And if you could just take a second and I'll share the results. And again, they are anonymous. So thank you. All right, I'm gonna end up ending this poll and sharing the results. Oh, wow, we actually have a tie. Can everybody see? Just give me a thumbs up. Okay, cool. We actually have a tie, so that's awesome. A change is gonna come and get us stand up. Nice. All right, that's good. I'm gonna stop sharing that and we'll move on to our next slide. All right, so there are 4 parts for today's session. Part 1, we're going to discuss understanding air quality issues. Part 2, we're going to discuss building an advocacy strategy now that we've identified some of those issues. Part 3, we'll talk about some resources and tools because we don't just want to sit here and lecture everyone today. We want to be able to give folks some tangible resources and tools that can help them in their advocacy journey. And then part 4, we will have Q&A. And so just as a reminder, please put the questions that you have in the chat and we will do our best to answer them. The ones that we don't get to, we will send them out in a follow-up email. So thank you. So we're going to jump into part 1, which is understanding air quality issues. But before we actually get into the content, we do have our second poll question. And so it's totally okay if folks don't know the answer to this question. We just want to get a sense of those who may know about this. And so I will go ahead and launch the second poll, which is what is the leading source of air pollution in North Carolina? Okay, I launched the poll. Okay, and I will end it here. And share results. Great. Yes. Transportation. Very nice. Great job. So I will move on to the next slide, which we will talk about the sources of air pollution. So yes, transportation, also known as mobile sources, is the primary source in North Carolina. So there are a variety of sources of air pollution. Some are natural and some are human-made. And so understanding these sources is essential because it helps identify and address the causes of the air quality problems that we face. And so in the United States, the 3 primary sources of air pollution are mobile sources, stationary sources, and area sources. Next slide, please. So what is air pollution? Air pollution is the presence of harmful substances in the air, and these substances can pose risks to human health, the environment, and even our property. So whether it's indoor or outdoors, it's an issue. And it's not just a United States issue, it's actually a global issue. Air pollution impacts millions of people worldwide. A recent Harvard study estimated that air pollution from fossil fuel combustion is responsible for 1 in 5 deaths globally. Next slide, please. So now that we know what air pollution is, let's talk a little bit about what type of health impacts it impacts our body. So we know that healthy air is critical in terms of having a healthy community, and it's something that we all deserve. But unfortunately, poor air quality is associated with various illnesses. So it impacts the human body in many different ways, including our respiratory health, our cardiovascular health, our mental health, reproductive health, and other parts of our body. Next slide, please. And so continuing our discussion on health impacts, it is important to point out that the health burdens of air pollution is not shared equally due to discriminatory policies and practices such as redlining, which is a systematic denial of services like mortgages and loans to residents in certain areas based on their ethnicity, race, and background. And so as a result of certain of these types of policies, some communities are more likely to be located near pollution sites. And also, some of these communities may have less access to resources that can mitigate air pollution, like air purifiers, healthcare access, or even the ability to move to an area that's less polluted. Additionally, some groups are more sensitive and likely to suffer severe health impacts from poor air quality, which only perpetuates the inequality as it relates to health disparities. Next slide, please. So besides health impacts, there are some environmental and economic impacts to consider. So air pollution creates climate change. Climate change leads to rising temperatures, increased sea levels, and more extreme weather. And then what that does to our food supply chain, it essentially is impacted because weather patterns are important for growing seasons. And so that not only affects the farmers who are growing crops, but also the consumers. And along the line, when we just talked about health impacts, climate change also means there's an increased amount of heat-related illnesses. And so that means more visits to the doctor, and that could place a financial burden on people, businesses, and healthcare system. Finally, climate change impacts tourism because natural scenic sites are losing its value. And so with rising sea levels, as an example, some coastal areas are predicted to be like underwater. And so that it's just in those areas as well, like it's getting harder for folks who own like their homes to get home insurance or get coverage, proper coverage in a situation where there's flooding and they need mold remediation services. It's just, these are things to think about. It's as we look at air pollution and climate change. All right, so now that we've identified the sources of air pollution and its impacts, let's talk about some strategies to address some of these issues. Thank you. So for part one, it was much shorter. Part two, this is part two where we're at right now. There's more, it's longer. And so we wanted to just give you a preview of some of the high level topics we'll be talking about. And so the first is air quality legislation, which actually leads us to our last poll question, which is on the next slide. So I will go ahead and launch that. And again, it's totally okay if folks, just take a guess. So I will go ahead and launch that poll because in terms of air quality legislation, the Clean Air Act is a really important piece of legislation. So I'll give it a few seconds. Okay, I'll end it here. And then I will share the results. Okay, all right. So actually, we are going to get into the answer on our next slide, which is, the answer is 6. So I will go ahead and stop sharing the poll so we can move on to the Clean Air Act. So let's get into the Clean Air Act. It's a federal law, so meaning it is supreme law that this applies to all of the states. And so states cannot create laws that conflict with the Clean Air Act. And so it's really important that states comply with this law. And it regulates those 6 criteria air pollutants, sorry, from stationary sources, which we had a slide on that earlier, which means power plants, industrial sites, and mobile sources, transportation. And so really and truly, this law authorizes the EPA, which is also known as the Environmental Protection Agency, to establish national ambient air quality standards, NAAQS. And the purpose of that is purpose of this law is to protect public health and welfare against those hazardous pollutants that you see on your screen right now. And so it's just really about limiting all of those pollutants. And as much as I would probably like and sort of enjoy going into the Clean Air Act and all of those pollutants, it's a really, really long piece of legislation. If anybody wants to go into it, when you get the slide deck, it will be hyperlinked there, so you can go through the Clean Air Act if you would like to do that, along with going into more depth about those different pollutants. And so this is a really important piece of legislation. And so we'll talk about some state laws on the next slide. Okay, so we're going to look at North Carolina's history of air quality legislation. Please keep in mind, these are just some examples of the pieces of legislation. This is not all. These are a few popular ones that we wanted to share. And so the first 2 I pulled from the North Carolina Department of Air Quality website. And then the last bill, HB 951, which we'll get into in a moment, is something that Clean Air has been really working on for the past couple of months and years, actually. So the purpose of this slide is not to go through each piece of legislation in depth. Again, I feel like if we did that on this call, I probably won't have a lot of people still on this call if we did that. And so let's talk about the first one, which is the Clean Smokestacks Act. This was enacted in 2002 and required coal-fired power plants to reduce its emissions. The type of emissions were nitrogen oxide and sulfur dioxide. Next, we have the inspection maintenance program. This is implemented to make sure that the air pollution controls are working properly on vehicles. We know here, well, everywhere, but especially in North Carolina, because we're talking about that transportation is a really leading source in air pollution. And so it's important to have those pollutants being monitored. And lastly is House Bill 951, also known as the Carbon Plan. And so the purpose of the Carbon Plan was to reduce carbon dioxide emissions by 70% come 2030 and reach carbon neutrality, meaning balancing out the amount of carbon dioxide that is being released into the air, meaning it is also being absorbed. And so that is also supposed to be taking place by 2050. So there are two main goals: reducing emissions around by 2030, and then carbon neutral by 2050. And those levels are compared to the levels of carbon dioxide in 2005. So comparing those. No, great. So who makes air policy decisions? So it's important to know that all levels of government are involved in regulating air pollutants. And so when it comes to state and local rules, it must be in accordance with federal policy, like we mentioned the Clean Air Act earlier. And so no state or local rules can be weaker than the Clean Air Act. And so the big takeaway from this slide is just to understand that all levels of government are important. And so when we think about the people that we elect and the policies that are going to address air pollution, everyone is pretty much involved. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right. So we're going to talk really quickly about the basics of advocacy. I already see a few folks on the call that I work with, and some folks on this call may be advocacy warriors or veterans. And so with advocacy, we know that it's a long-term effort, and sometimes it may feel slow, stagnant, and sometimes you may even feel discouraged. So just wanted a nice little reminder that it's not an overnight success. If anybody on the call, when we get to Q&A and we open it up, if anybody has any tips around how they got things moving really, really fast, I would love to hear it. So we just wanted that lovely reminder about that this is something that's a long term. So just keep pushing through, planning, and having optimism. Next, thank you. So what's the purpose of advocacy? Advocacy helps amplify the voices of individuals or groups who may not necessarily have the platform or resources to be heard otherwise. Advocacy can drive change by pressuring government officials to act responsibly and address injustices. And so before we dive into strategies around your advocacy journey, there's one important thing that we may want to address, and that's on the next slide, which is setting clear goals and objectives. So this is important because you want to be able to first identify the issue. So what's the problem? What's happening? Who's impacted? What is the source of pollution? The second is conducting some research. So determine if this is a local issue or a state issue. Is there an existing policy or piece of legislation that addresses this current issue? And so in the manual, we actually have a little guide around how you can look up certain pieces of legislation. So as you're conducting research, it just helps assist you in that. Third, you want to be able to set SMART goals. So SMART means the S is for specific, so clearly stated. M, measurable. There's some kind of metrics. An example could be like, do you want to put 5 air monitors in a community? A is achievable. So something that's realistic and can be reasonably accomplished. R is relevant, meaning that it aligns with your mission or issue. T is time bound. So try to set a timeline for each goal and phase. So it could be phase 1 is maybe research. Phase 2 is education and awareness. Phase 3 is taking action. Next, you want to be able to prioritize goals. I know in the advocacy world, we always want to try to address every single issue. We have really big hearts. And so part of that is making sure we prioritize some goals because we want to avoid burnout or feeling overwhelmed. And so determine which goals are important and most urgent, if possible. Next is outlining strategy and communication. So take some time to outline some strategies or tactics that may be helpful for you and your community. So that can be conducting interviews, doing grassroots organizing, lobbying, media campaigns, coalition building. And then after you strategize, you want to be able to take some time to mobilize and engage with key stakeholders, allies, supporters, just anybody who really cares about this issue and would also like to make a change too. And finally, we want to talk about monitoring and evaluating your work. So oftentimes in the advocacy world, we do a lot of go, 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 and we don't take a step back to measure some of our impact and our progression. So try to develop a plan for how you intend to track your progression on your advocacy efforts. And the manual will touch upon all of these topics more in depth. So a lot of things that I said just now will be covered in the manual. Next slide, please. Thank you. So let's go into some of those strategies. It was very hard narrowing down 5 strategies, so just please know that this list is not a finalized list. CleanAIRE is not in the business of telling folks how they should advocate. Instead, we always like to take a holistic approach and see what's going on in the community. And so we just wanted to highlight these 5 strategies that we have seen folks explore. So the first is data and research. And so sometimes data is really hard to refute. It's almost acts as like evidence. And so if you have some air monitors in your area that is tracking pollutants, this will help your advocacy journey. And when it comes to research, it's important to gather really reliable and credible resources on the issue. So for example, the EPA has some good health impact studies that you can use in your advocacy journey. Next, you can create an education and awareness campaign. Sometimes people just need to really be informed and educated. And so it's just helpful to engage in some awareness campaigns. 3 is policy and advocacy. There are a lot of different opportunities to engage with elected officials. And so I'm not going to talk about lobbying or fly-ins because Kennedy and Ryan have the pleasure of doing that. And so we can discuss a little bit more about the other public opportunities, which are like speaking at a public hearing or providing public comments. Oftentimes, the folks who write policy they have good intentions, but at the same time may not understand how the policy is going to be implemented and impact people's day-to-day lives, or what does that look like on the ground. And so if there's any point in time for public input, we always encourage folks to share their experience and what this would do to their community. And speaking of community, let's talk about how to engage community. So there's always like strength in numbers. And so if you can attend community meetings as a collective, if you can create petitions, which we have some resources we'll share with you that help create petitions, that's always great. And finally, in more severe cases, you might find yourself wanting to take legal action. And that's a whole nother pathway. And so at CleanAIRE, we are not a law firm. However, we do work with other legal partners who we can help refer folks to those partners in case seems to be a way for folks to get legal representation. Next slide. Great. So one thing that we'll talk about here is just one strategy we'll talk about is social media. And so social media is a great way to get information really fast. And also for some reason, it makes people feel more comfortable speaking up. So We're shamelessly going to drop in our social media link in the chat. So if you just want some examples of how to create awareness campaigns, we just encourage folks to follow us if you have social media. And with that being said, I am going to turn it over to Kennedy.
Thank you, Brittany. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to be here and so nice to meet all of you. So essentially, fly-ins are a organized day where voters get to come to DC to meet with their legislators face-to-face on behalf of issues that their communities care about. I have done several fly-ins, and I primarily worked with nonprofit organizations that represented various issues on behalf of communities across the country. I had the opportunity to collaborate with these nonprofits and help them to schedule and organize these meetings with their state legislators. And also, as a White House intern, I engaged with different federal agencies and offices within the White House. And I will say that even though there are, many great ideas that are circulating within the federal government on how to address important issues, ultimately, I'm a firm believer that there is power within the people, and fly-ins are just one of the most effective ways to demonstrate support for an issue and push bills so that the federal government can be better equipped to make important decisions. And I will pass it to Ryan to talk more about lobbying.
Awesome. Thank you all for allowing me to be with you all tonight. We have this saying, "What goes up must come down," and that's true in the conservation community. If it's in the air, eventually it will rain and it ends up in our creeks and our waterways. So the work that y'all do is really important. Quick overview just of kind of what's going on at the legislature. In North Carolina, your legislature is very powerful. We have what's called a Dillon's Rule state, which means the state legislature has the authority to go in and tweak municipal code however they see fit. There's benefits, there's drawbacks to that, and I'm not here to give you all a political theory discussion, but that is how it is in North Carolina. This is a really big election for a lot of reasons, but it's huge at the state legislature. And I'm not just talking about majority, supermajority, whatever. But what we're seeing, there's a couple big things that I'm tracking. In the North Carolina House, we're going to see a ton of turnover and a lot of shifting in leadership roles. Not just Speaker Moore now running for Congress. A lot of different committee chairs are shifting around. So it's going to be really critical that all our legislators understand these local priorities. The Senate, it's a little bit more steady. Won't be seeing too much turnover there, but further proof that senators have the same amount of staff as House members, and that's one staffer in North Carolina. So they have more responsibilities, same amount of staff as the House. So they need to rely on you, their constituents, for critical information as well. Other crazy thing happening in Raleigh, we have our Council of States. You think of, a president can appoint their cabinet secretaries. In North Carolina, we vote for our cabinet secretaries. Again, pros, cons to that. But of those 10 cabinet positions in North Carolina, we will for sure have 6 new ones, 6 new people serving in those roles. So a lot of turnover, a lot of change happening in Raleigh. So your voice is just as important now as if it ever was. Last thing about happening in the legislature, and this just all builds up to how to talk to your legislators and the importance of talking to your legislative candidates now. We did not have a budget this past year. That's not good. There's no way around it. That's a problem. That being said, there's gonna be a lot of money next year in 2025. So looking at those local priorities, if your community wants air monitoring equipment or some sort of local initiative, if you can get money from the legislature, it's really easy to use it. They just kind of drop the check off and then say, have fun. So Obviously, it's more elaborate than that, but you get the point. So that's kind of what's happening in Raleigh right now and what we're seeing, what's going to be on the horizon. Um, Real talk with y'all, the Republicans are still going to have a majority. It may not be a super majority, but assuming and just banking on one party's rule over the other being there forever is a really dangerous proposition. So I have to say that, and I say that to every group that I talk to about these things. So that's that. Okay. Enough of the legislative overview. You all can just hold on and we'll get through it. So election day will come and go, and then your candidate becomes a legislator. And what's really important is always be polite. And this is really hard. I struggle with it because some of these people I really don't like. Personally, I don't like you. But you know, the saying of the truth will set you free. In the legislature, it's the truth will bite you in the butt. So best to be polite at all times, be friendly with people, know that they're doing the best that they can. And if you have nothing nice to say, you can always thank them for taking time away from their family to serve our state. That's the easiest. Thank you for your time and thank you for your service to our state. So always be polite, even to the ones you didn't vote for. They're still your representative, and you are their boss. An easy way to be polite is to always stay on topic. I love talking about the Lorax from Dr. Seuss. I'm the Lorax that speaks for the trees. Brittany is your Lorax that speaks for the air. Ryan is the Lorax that speaks for the river. Ryan is not the Lorax that speaks for school funding or health insurance issues or conservation. It all kind of ties together, but you kind of get the point, right? Stay on topic. If your issue is that important to you, that's what you're there to talk about. So whether they're your candidate now or your state legislator later, always stay on topic. When I take people to rally with me, I tell them, if you feel the burning desire to get off topic, crack a joke at my expense. I mean, just don't, we're not here to talk about anything else. We're here to talk about this. Be persistent. Your legislators get hundreds of emails probably a day, especially at the start of session. But a great example in our river world is we have a supporter who his backyard floods every time it rains. And he kept calling me, Ryan, oh, it's so bad. Ryan, Ryan, Ryan. And I finally just told him, you know, I can't actually do anything, right? Like I can't stop the rain. I can't change the flow. I know why your backyard's flooding. You know why, but your legislator needs to know about it. And I kid you not, we had a really wet spring and winter. So that's good for my efforts. But every time it rained, this gentleman sent his state house rep and his state senator an email with a picture of his backyard flooding saying, you have to do something about this. Help fix stormwater controls. And he did it every time it rained. So finally, I show up in Raleigh and his state senator grabs me and throws me down in his office and says, Ryan, who is this guy? Do you know him? How do I get him off my back? And next thing you know, that representative, that legislator is running a bill for us on stormwater. So being persistent, being laser focused on your topic, being polite, always just speaking from your heart, being authentic really does get the attention of your legislators. I already said it, but be authentic, be true, don't lie, know who you are. It's you know me, right? We say all politics is local. Well, if they know you, they know that you care. You know that they know that you're a person, not just you're looking out to get them. That leads to that trust. So that authenticity is critical. And I'll tell you, you need to start talking to your legislators right now. Don't wait for after the election because it's going to be you and 10,000 other lobbyists. I call it Raleigh amnesia, where legislators on both sides of the aisle, they go to Raleigh and then they're doing legislative things and then they come back and then they forget they're in elected office. So it is critical that you start talking to them now, making these issues known to them so that when they get into office that it's top of mind for them. I'm not seeing conservation of any form, clean air, clean water, clean lands. No one's talking about it. None of our candidates are. Democrats, Republicans, no one's talking about it. And that keeps me up at night. So because it's not listed as their priorities, we need to make it a priority for them. So please go out, figure out who are your candidates for state legislature, for office in general, and start engaging with their campaigns and letting them know that you're the Lorax that speaks for clean air and that you want them to be a Lorax for clean air too. Okay, that's my stump speech. So I will hand it back over to Brittany and I apologize for going over my time.
You are totally fine, Ryan, and thank you so much for that. We're going to transition into talking about community engagement. So when it comes to coalitions and partnerships, it's really important to find some if they exist, because it helps folks connect to others who share the same passion, which can help amplify your voice and impact. Additionally, being part of a network like a coalition or partnership means you'll have more access to people with different expertise and resources, which also helps with credibility. In terms of hosting educational workshops and events, like we mentioned, it's really important to increase awareness. And so workshops and events help you engage in conversations about air quality issues, what the impacts are, what's happening, and how to take some action. In the manual, you will find that there's actually like a how to host an educational workshop or event, like how what do I need? What do I need to do? What are the planning procedures? And so we provide kind of a guide for that. And really and truly, it's just, you know, with hosting educational workshops and events, it's just you want to empower folks with equipping them with more knowledge. In terms of community outreach, it's always great to work in community and identify some community leaders or credible messengers within the community if possible. And so it's always good to conduct some community outreach. And also we discuss strength in numbers. And so if folks in the community really care about this issue and they want to sign on to a petition that you create, that's always great. And so in the actual manual, we have some resources that can help you create a petition. CleanAIRE NC is always willing to help folks with this as well. And so in terms of tools and resources, we're going to move on to our next section, which is resources and tools. And so if we go to the next slide, you'll see I probably broke rule number 1 in presentation 101 by putting a whole bunch of text on one slide. I just did this as a resource for folks. We just didn't want to provide a session where we talked a lot, but we also want to provide folks with some tools and resources. And so I'm not going to go through each one of these resources, but they are here and available. Some are free and low cost, some of these in which we ourselves as an organization use. And so for project management tools or communicating with community, if your community wants to raise some money to do different campaigns, these are just some tools resources that we wanted to help share with folks. Moving on to one of our biggest resources and something I've been mentioning throughout this entire presentation is that we have created an advocacy manual. That's the lovely cover and the table of contents of some of the topics that we cover. You will get the link to this in your thank you email. This document will also live on our website and will be regularly updated with different topics, but we're really excited. And so this session isn't the end all be all. You'll have some resources available. CleanAIRE is always also a resource for folks. We're always wanting to work in community and figure out how we can help support the advocates across the state. Next slide, please. And this is our last slide with more resources, but these are some organizations that are in the conservation space. Also, there is the EPA website, the North Carolina Division of Air Quality. These are also just some hyperlinks of some impactful resources and things that I have mentioned throughout the presentation. There's also a sample ballot and finding your legislators. If we want to talk to them now and you don't know who they are, you can go ahead and click on that link when you get the slide deck and you will find your legislators. Next slide, please. So we're wrapping up this session, and the reason why we wanted to hold this session was to talk about how advocacy is essentially accountability. As Ryan mentioned, that we need more candidates to talk about these issues, and so voting is a way to kind of hold elected officials accountable. We can do more and should do more, and we must do more. And so voting is part of a really great part of advocacy. So make sure you guys are registered to vote. On the next slide, you will see the deadline to register to vote for the general election is October 11th, which is right around the corner. And November 5th is election day. So if you are able and can vote, we encourage that. And so we will move on to our Q&A session, which I'm actually going to stop recording so that folks can either raise their hand or discuss freely. And so let me go ahead and stop recording, and then I can pass it to Harmony to see if there are any questions.